Greetings, everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of Culture Clash. It is once again the Christmas time of year. And for a lot of us, that means toys, that means Christmas lights, that means Santa Claus. But for a lot of us out there, too, that means something very special. It means it's time once again for a new Doctor Who Christmas special. And this is a big one this year, and it's going to bring on a ton of change for all Doctor Who fans. As for the first time ever, we are going to see a regeneration into a new Doctor, and it will be a female Doctor played by Jodie Whittaker. So what we are going to do today is go over what the current state of Doctor Who is. We're going to reminisce about the Christmas specials of Doctor Who, have a discussion about the Peter Capaldi run as the 12th Doctor, and talk about what our hopes are, because we have a new Doctor, Jodie Whittaker, our first female Doctor, but we're also going to have a new writing team, as Stephen Moffat's last episode of writing Doctor Who will be this year's Christmas special. But I can't talk about Doctor Who alone. There's just too much to talk about. So thankfully, I found a couple other fellow Whovians to talk some Who with me. And it starts with my good friend and the host of Couch Potato Theater, one Mr. Davis Grayson. How are you doing, Davis?
Hello, sir. It's wonderful to be on board today on this very holiday, chilly Florida day.
Holiday chilly, huh?
Yeah.
58 degrees.
Yeah. 58 degrees, it's holiday time here.
Just remember, it's bigger on the inside, Davis. But
all right,
and we've got some, yeah. We've got something very special for you, because we have somebody joining us for the first time ever on the Fandom Podcast Network, and he's coming from us from across the pond to give us that special hometown Doctor Who information. And I would like to welcome, he's the founder of the Spacebook on Facebook, and he is also an accomplished cartoonist. Mr. Dan Hadley is joining us. How are you doing, Dan?
I'm fine, thank you, gentlemen. Very special, you say. That's building me up a little bit. No pressure there.
There's no pressure around here, Dan. We're all just laid back.
I feel like I'm being brought before the High Council of the Time Lords here with you two, the Lords of Podcast Land here.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but there could be some we might keep a Dalek in the closet in case you get out of line.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
we have a few things here in the basement. So, well, Dan, I want to start with you first, because it's your first time here on any show for the Fandom Podcast Network. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and especially about your fandom with Doctor Who.
Talk about it. They're kind of, in some ways they're one and the same thing. That Doctor Who has been an appreciation of Doctor Who has been a part of me for as long as I can remember. I mean, I'm in my 40s, and one of my very earliest memories is of, sounds like a cliche, but it's true. It's of watching Doctor Who from behind the sofa when I was little more than 3 years old. I won't tell you exactly when that is, because, literally one of my first memories. And back then in the mid-70s, it's no exaggeration to say everybody watched it. It's the height of the Tom Baker era. Obviously, things over time, the mainstream sort of left it behind a little bit. I never did, and Doctor Who never left me, even when it was no longer a television series. I stayed with it, it stayed with me. And of course, when it came back, which we'll touch on a little bit today, I've no doubt. But when it came back, it was better than I think any of us could have possibly imagined, myself included. To have been following it again, seeing it, and I would argue that it's been bigger than ever since it's been back. It's been a joy, because of course I'm a father now. My kids have grown up watching Doctor Who too, and I'm very grateful to the programme. I extend generosity to all the changes that have come before, and no doubt we're going to see in the future. And it's not something I imagine will ever leave me, guys. And seeing it become a global thing, not just big here again, but become something that's loved internationally, is just fantastic.
Yeah. Now, okay, so I got to ask you real quick, Dan, who is your doctor?
My doctor.
When you think of the Doctor, who is your doctor?
Oh, like I say, my doctor I'm glad you didn't ask who my favourite was, because I can never say. I can never pick. But my doctor's Peter Davison. Wasn't my first doctor, but he was the doctor that turned me from a viewer into a fan, is what I always say to people. It was that Regeneration, Tom Baker, who I'd watched literally since I was old enough to take notice of the television. For him to disappear and be replaced by Peter Davison, all of a sudden I felt like I'd got my doctor. I could see it all from the beginning, all over again, just as a whole generation hopefully will do again next year with Jodie Whittaker. So Peter Davison.
Yep. Now, Davis, for you, where did your love of Who come in, and who is your doctor?
Well, I gotta say, it was probably back in the 80s, where on PBS on Saturday nights, and if you were raised in the 80s, you'd probably know that Tom Baker was the doctor, was my first doctor, because he was always on there on PBS. He was my first doctor. However, my favorite doctor, where I actually became a fan, is the Eighth Doctor.
Oh,
now you might think Paul McGann, of course, but you might think, well, he was only in one movie and one short episode. Well, I actually had the pleasure of meeting Paul McGann, and it was so cool to actually talk to him about Big Finish. I started listening to all the Big Finish productions that he was on, and absolutely loved them. And he quickly became my favorite doctor. Now, I have grown to love Capaldi, but Paul McGann will still always be my doctor.
Yeah, I think for me, it's one of the more recent doctors. Matt Smith, I thought was absolutely phenomenal as the doctor. There's something about how Matt Smith portrayed the doctor that just really resided within me, and just hit something that I can't quite explain. But I think that's what makes when you attach yourself to an actor who's played the doctor, that's what makes you latch onto that particular doctor. Like you, Davis, I grew up watching it on PBS, so a lot of Tom Baker at that time. When they did the relaunch with Eccleston and then David Tennant, who I'm also a huge fan of. But for me, I think it was Matt Smith. But Davis, I want to come back to you because I think it's a good starting point for what we're going to talk about as far as the current state of Doctor Who, because Doctor Who is I agree with what Dan said. It's bigger than any time, I think, in its life cycle right now. And I think when you talk about the Eighth Doctor, I think that was kind of the end of that. Was a period where afterwards we did not have Doctor Who for a while, and it was kind of an end of a dark time for Doctor Who, because I think when the Eighth Doctor special came out here in the States, and the fact that it was also filmed in Canada, and it didn't really do that well on Fox because they were really hoping that it would pick up in the States and be grabbed here in the States to help it continue. It was a dark time. So Davis, and I know we're going to be releasing a Couch Potato Theater that you did with our good friend Christian from Mark Who 42 over the summer. We've been holding on to it because we wanted to wait until we got closer to this Christmas special to release it. How do you feel about where Doctor Who was after that special with the Eighth Doctor?
Well, after the 96 movie, it was 96, yeah. It just basically just kind of fizzled out, except for Big Finish. They still had some of like the book writing, I remember correctly, and there was something else. And I know that when I had talked to Paul McGann a couple of years ago, for the first time, I asked him, I said, how hard was it to step back into the role? He said, well, I've been doing the Big Finish for quite a while now, so it was actually pretty easy on screen and everything. And I think at that time, it was kind of like the point where a lot of Star Wars fans from 1984, after the final, 83 was when the movie came out, but 84, you were slowing less and less Star Wars toys and memorabilia. And until 1991, when Timothy Zahn released Heir to the Empire, which still today is still one of my favorite Star Wars books. So I think it was a lot of times to see if there was, he wanted to poke the fire to see if there was any more life to it. And apparently it still was. Yeah, and I absolutely love the Big Finish productions. They actually do a really great job with it. And every now and then they'll have sales like you wouldn't believe. And I was able to snag quite a few.
Yeah, I love Big Finish too, Davis. I absolutely, I'm all over that. I love it.
Well, and that brings me to you, Dan. What were the feelings about where Doctor Who stood after that 96 special over in your neck of the woods? Because I know that was a very hard time for a lot of Who fans over there.
Yeah. Well, the problem that we had was that by the time the TV movie was shown here, the penny had already started to drop that was probably going to be it, and that we weren't going to see that Doctor again. We wasn't certain, but we were aware that it hadn't gone down very well. It hadn't got the numbers, as they say, on American network TV. And Davis just hit the nail on the head. It did gradually fizzle out, and it was kind of heartbreaking to have it happen again when we'd waited so long to get that TV movie. But the early to mid 90s it had hardened the fan base. We were in it for the long term anyway. Fandom went back to the coalface, and Davis has just mentioned Big Finish. Big Finish they came from the fan base. The audio dramas, as you no doubt know, that they mark their 20th anniversary next year, making the Bernice Summerfield audios at Big Finish originally. And then, of course, they got the Doctor Who license, and it was 2002 when Paul McGann joined the stable. So it was a long, long road. To the mainstream, if something's out of sight, it's kind of out of mind. The fan base, we just took it back where it had been before, took it back into our hearts, just kept our fingers crossed. I mean, there were lots of positive signs, guys. I mean, I was at the Doctor Who exhibition in Llangollen in 1999, talking to the people who were working there. And that was an exhibition that I'm sure a lot of listeners may know, that was doubled up as the factory that had made the action figures at the time. That's how small it had got. You could have this exhibition and factory on the same location. But I got talking to the staff there, and that was 1999 and 2000, and even then there was rumours of it coming back, that Russell T Davies was involved, and the whispers never disappeared. So I always felt that it was always a case of not if but when, and it was just a very, very long wait.
Yeah. Now, and you talk about that because it was about 2003 that all of a sudden things were Russell T Davies was coming along, and all of a sudden the Doctor's coming back. The Doctor's coming back. And then all of a sudden we get the Doctor back, and it's Christopher Eccleston with a look for the Doctor that threw everybody off.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people did expect Paul McGann to return with the show. There was quite a lot of desire for that, certainly within fandom. And the last thing they expected was a crew cut, a northern accent, a leather jacket, and somebody with the profile and respect, gravitas that Christopher Eccleston had even then.
Yeah, and I know for me, it actually took me a little bit before I jumped on to the Eccleston Who, and actually what sold it for me was actually I saw the quote-unquote Christmas-themed episode of his run, where they went back to meet Charles Dickens on an airplane flight. And that really kind of pulled me back in. What about you, Davis? When did you kind of get back onto the Doctor Who train after the relaunch with Eccleston?
I had a friend of mine who I worked with for many years, and he was a huge Whovian, and it was kind of funny because he told me about it, and he says, "Yeah, it's back on the air. You need to watch this." And I said, "Okay, I can watch that." And I actually picked up at David Tennant, and I think it was The Fires of Pompeii was one of the first ones I watched. And I thought, because it was on BBC America. It was on a Sunday afternoon. They had like 2 or 3 of them. It may have been Fires of Pompeii. I can't remember exactly, but it was just like 5 hours long worth of Doctor Who. So I was like, oh, I'll watch it. I mean, hey, it's Doctor Who. You can't go wrong with that. And I watched it and I loved it. And, it eventually came onto Netflix, and it actually, I started watching all of it. Then it went off Netflix for a while. Then it was on Amazon Prime for a while. So I'm caught up with stuff, but it made me actually really want to go back and watch some of the original Doctors, like number 2, number 3, the ones you didn't really see that much growing up in the stateside. So, of course, there's not many. I mean, there's a lot of episodes, but there's some of them that they're just gone, unfortunately.
Yeah. Now, I think too, one of the big things, at least here in the States, was I think a lot of people really started jumping on to returning to Doctor Who here in the States when David Tennant's run started. And I'm going to even say it was probably about a halfway through Tennant's run before a lot of people really started jumping on word of mouth
Really?
and everything like that. And I think, especially towards the end of Tennant's run, that's when a lot of people were really getting back onto the Doctor Who wagon in the States. But what was it like over there, Dan? Were people just immediately jumping back onto
Oh yes.
Who fandom?
When it
Or was there there was no trepidation seeing what the change with Eccleston that Russell T. Davis brought to the show?
No, I can't find another word other than exploded. In 2005, Doctor Who here in the UK absolutely exploded, and that was even. I mean, I don't know if you're aware of this, but within a week of Rose, that first episode with Eccleston broadcasting, within 48 hours, we knew that he was leaving, which you would think would be adverse publicity, that it would have sullied it somewhat, but that didn't happen at all. I think the quality of the show, the reach of it, the language and the energy of it just reached people, spoke to children again, and within 3 weeks tops, it was unmissable. It was the program everybody was talking about again. And yeah, Eccleston was gone within a year, but the public was head over heels in love with Russell T Davies' version of Doctor Who. It was made known to us pretty quickly in the papers that we didn't have the wait that we've just had, wondering who was next. They told us right away pretty much it was going to be David Tennant. People liked him anyway, and they just ran with it. And the action figures started coming, and the books started coming. And 2007, 2008, 2009, it was a golden age for Doctor Who. It just got bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the big things too, especially with that first season of Who, was the amazing work of Billie Piper as Rose, but also the fact we get introduced to Captain Jack Harkness, who is played by the irreplaceable John Barrowman.
And now appearing dressed as Wonder Woman at a YouTube link near you.
So we had that. We went into Tennant, and then the 11th Doctor, Matt Smith, came. And I think that's where a lot of people, Davis, and I think you'll agree with me on this, at least here in the States, felt like Doctor Who was beginning to get a little bit Americanized. Like they were writing Doctor Who a little bit more for the American audience with how they portrayed the episodes with Matt Smith, and of course the introduction of the amazing Karen Gillan as Amy Pond. What were your feelings going from Tennant, who was extremely popular, to Matt Smith, Davis?
It was interesting. I mean, I enjoyed David Tennant's run, and I actually got to see him regenerate, first when it was actually on TV for the first time. And so it was interesting to see him grow as a doctor, how he becomes the doctor, and how he actually goes through that whole thing, because there was some really interesting storylines. I mean, even the part with Rory and Amy, with River, so to speak. So I mean, a lot of storylines was pretty good. Some of them were kind of silly, but other ones were it was a really interesting run. I really enjoyed it. I mean, I was very surprised Matt Smith didn't want to go longer, but hey, I guess it's just the nature of the beast.
I think Stephen Moffat was surprised Matt Smith didn't want to go longer as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, what was the reception to Matt Smith over on your area, Dan? How was he received?
Well, they, again, I mean, there was a good year in between him being announced and actually appearing on screen. There was any trepidation from the British public was dropped almost instantaneously. I think Stephen Moffat played a fantastic game. He knocked it out of the park with the 11th hour in meeting people's expectations, opening that door on something new and gradually evolving the show and taking the audience by the hand with it and offering a new Doctor who had some of the same, enough of the same appeal of David Tennant's, what David Tennant had done with it, with enough something new. And yeah, people, like I say, people were worried at first, but that within 2 or 3 months, it was like, Matt Smith was the Doctor. His face was everywhere. And, this is a guy who 7 years on, and obviously he's now in The Crown, but he was announced as like the best dressed man in the world the other day through GQ magazine. His profile is huge now, and he's just as much of a national treasure here as David Tennant is, I would say. They're both equally loved.
Yeah. And, I think one of the things too, and we're going to, because I think it something that affects when we talk about the next Doctor is one of the things that both Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat did was they were very good at matching companions with the Doctor.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think everybody, when you think of Eccleston, obviously Rose, and I think when you think of Tennant, most everybody thinks of Rose as well. But I mean, even then, when you had Catherine Tate as Donna or Freeman Ogma as Martha Jones, and even just other people that guested with Tennant, whether it was Kylie Minogue in one of the Christmas specials, they always had good chemistry. And I think the same thing can be said for both with Matt Smith, not only for Amy Pond, but Arthur Darvill as Rory, and also Jenna Coleman as Clara. I think they were very good at matching the chemistry with the Doctors.
Yeah,
but I think that kind of leads us to the 12th Doctor, Peter Capaldi, which I think going back to an older Doctor after having fairly young Doctors for the modern run of Doctor Who, as they like to call it, kind of threw a lot of people off. And though a lot of people who are fans of Capaldi were very excited for him to be Doctor Who. What was the react? We talked a little bit about this before we started, Dan, but talk about the reaction to Capaldi being announced in your area, Dan.
Well, it was a curious situation because he was even though we knew who David Tennant was, he wasn't a household name. He was, it's that guy from Casanova, it's that guy from this, that, or the other. With Peter Capaldi, he was a name actor, and more than that, he was an actor associated with one particular role. Yeah, Malcolm Tucker in The Thick of It, which there's not a great deal of crossover audience for Doctor Who in The Thick of It, I suppose. But Malcolm Tucker's a very strong, forceful character. But of course, when he was revealed, there was a lot of excitement, and the BBC gave it a huge showcase. But there was a lot of resistance because of his age. People who were, used to these. What was the expression? That you're dashing young men, as Capaldi said in Deep Breath. People were used to it. They liked it like that. This was something that, it's patriarchal. There's no mistaking Peter Capaldi for your big brother. He was a father figure. He was grey hair and things, and people didn't know what to expect. There was a certain amount of resistance, and of course, in knowing what he was going to do with the part as well, whether he was going to play it as an old man, because obviously Matt Smith is a young man who, at times, what he did so well was to play it as an old man on occasions. And how was Peter Capaldi going to flip that? I think it's no secret that the Capaldi years, as I said, haven't necessarily been kind to the show in the UK. I think people were very slow to warm to him. And it's a case of people will only really appreciate how good he has been after he's gone. And that's no reflection on who's to follow. But I think it's partly because Doctor Who's been back for a very, very long time. Stephen Moffat has been writing it for quite a long time. And, those people get... I think it's not even Peter Capaldi's fault. I think that because it's been back on for a long time, the audience perhaps has got a little bit complacent. The BBC has got a little bit complacent. It does need refreshing. Stephen Moffat did try that last year and really re-energised the show, re-energised the format, and re-energised his Doctor. I thought Capaldi got a big spring in his step last year. I thought last year was a superb performances. The characterisation was right in the middle of where it had been in series 8 and 9, giving him a lot more to get his teeth into. So I think he's going out on top, and I think the British public are really sad to see him go, whereas a couple of years ago, they still kind of wanted Matt Smith back.
Now for you, Davis, because I'll talk about Capaldi's reception, at least my impression of Capaldi's reception here in the States. But what was your feeling once you started watching episodes with Peter Capaldi? What was your feeling on it?
Well, I think it was probably from the first line we ever heard him say was, "I got a new kidney." Happy. I mean, you hear that, you're going, what in the world? But I actually grew to love him. I actually thought he was and he still is a really great doctor. And I thought it was so cool. And I don't know if this is apocrypha or if it's actual true, but was it true that he actually wrote the BBC when he was young and said, "I want to be on Doctor Who"?
Yeah.
He wanted to be the Doctor,
Yeah.
and that is very
He wrote to the Radio
Okay.
Times, which is at the time, writing to the Radio Times pretty much was writing to the BBC. They owned it then. So he had several letters published in the Radio Times, which is like the TV guide that you've got there. Really, I mean, some of the letters, some of your listeners have probably seen them online. They're quite easy to come across if you Google them. But yeah, like real deep cuts. He knew his Doctor Who then. I'm not sure how old he was. He was very young, but there, things about the title sequences and gushing over stories. They're very heartwarming to read these letters.
That's cool. That's cool. I mean, and I know a couple of his episodes, his first season or so, seemed like they were written more for 11th Doctor, but I think that's just a given. I think that just happens when they're doing a transition period. But this past season, I pretty much enjoyed it. I mean, the Husbands of River Song, I will tell you right now that if they would have ended Doctor Who right there, or if Stephen Moffat would have ended it right there and said, no more, I think that was a very fitting episode. I really enjoyed it. That's just my own personal opinion. If someone disagrees with me, hey, that's fine. But that's just what I thought.
No, I'd hold with that too. I mean, that was Stephen Moffat did believe that was going to be his final episode for quite a while. They only just got him back for series 10.
Yeah.
It does.
Now, I think, Dan, what I want to bring up to you is I think how the reception to Capaldi was over in your area was the same here stateside. I think a lot of people were really kind of thrown back by Capaldi at first. Part of it was, and Davis, I think you'll agree with me on this, you kind of brought up the point. The regeneration from Matt Smith to Capaldi was just so sudden. It was like, bam, all of a sudden we've got Peter Capaldi right in our face.
That's true. That's true. However, we did see Peter Capaldi before the regeneration twice.
That is true. We saw him in the 50th anniversary special with Matt Smith and David Tennant, as we saw his eyes as the Doctor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was incredible.
And then that was absolutely incredible. And what was the second time, Davis?
Oh, the Fires of Pompeii.
Oh.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. So now here's the thing, at least from my take on Peter Capaldi. I thought the first season for Peter Capaldi was very rough because I think that was written for Matt Smith. I think Stephen Moffat had written that season to be the 11th Doctor, Matt Smith. You still have so many of the characters from Matt Smith's run involved. I think it was kind of like Capaldi was walking in Matt Smith's shoes. But I think the other problem they really had with Peter Capaldi was there was just no good chemistry between him and Clara, played by Jenna Coleman. And I don't know if you guys feel that, but it just felt like it was an effort. And I mean, they even tried to kind of address this in the first episode when she was struggling so much with, now it's not the young dashing doctor, it's this older doctor that she doesn't know. So, Dan, what was your take on that?
Similar. I'm going to disagree. I think they did have chemistry together, but I agree there was a problem, and I've thought about this before, and I think a lot of it was in the character of Clara too. Obviously, we'd had her in the previous run, but if you remember, if you cast your mind back to series, when was it? Series 7. That character, how Clara was then, she was kind of a story device as the impossible girl, and there was a lot of mystery surrounding her. When we were represented with the character again in Deep Breath, we knew so little about her as a real person. She didn't feel so formed. And so we'd got a companion that we hardly knew. We'd got a doctor that we hardly knew. We were told that they knew each other, but it was out of sync, I feel. And it took a while, I think. Obviously, it's quite natural that the actors would take a little while to find that sort of harmonious, to make it feel natural. And I think the audience struggled a little bit there too. And then there was the fact that they were deliberately pitching Capaldi's Doctor as being more barbed, colder, Into the Dalek in particular. I love that episode, partly because he's so nasty almost. I kind of like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it did. It was kind of off kilter a little.
Yeah, no, I can agree with that. I think one of the problems too with that first run of Capaldi, that first season with him, was a very dark season for Doctor Who as well. You had the whole Danny Pink storyline and the story with those Cybermen, and it was a very dark, disturbing thing. But Davis, one thing I want to talk about that first Capaldi season was there was something that was established in that first Capaldi season that was quite ingenious, and that was the return of the Master, but the return of the Master that in a way we have never seen before. The Master as a female, played by the amazing Michelle Gomez, and I that opened up a door that is leading us to what we're about to currently see with the newest iteration of the Doctor and the newest season of the Doctor. What was your impressions when you found out that character was the Master, Davis?
That Stephen Moffat somehow saw the articles and saw the picture of Mary Poppins as a Time Lord. I thought it was cool. I thought it was a different version of it. I like to know how that happens. And there is a story of Big Finish. I won't go into it, but there is a story how an alternate view of how something like that happened. It's done by I haven't read it yet, so I don't know the full story, but it's done by Peggy Carter. What's her Haley?
Haley Atwell.
Yes, she's in it, I believe, if I remember correctly. But it's a completely different, where she's actually the Doctor, if I remember correctly. But yeah, it was very different take, and I loved it. And we don't actually get to see how she becomes Missy up until just this past season, or do we?
Yeah, no, they do show that in this past season, and it's quite interesting. And I don't want to go into, as the Great River Song would say, spoilers, but but it was very well done. And I think it's one of the last great things Moffat has done for Doctor Who. Dan, what was the reception? What for you? What was the reception of seeing the Master as a female and that revelation?
Well, there'd been rumours. There'd been rumours all year. There was a character earlier that season in an episode called Time Heist, played by an actress whose name I can't remember. Keely Hawes, is that a name? I can't quite remember. But yeah, there was a character earlier that season. People were talking about that may be a female Master. I didn't buy into that. But we did have the Missy character sort of peppered through series 8, didn't we? And that episode, the revelation, didn't sit well with me at all. I didn't buy it for a moment. And Yeah, I found it incredibly disappointing, and yeah, it just didn't ring true, didn't connect for me as somebody who's a big fan of the Master and who's a big fan of Michelle Gomez. I think she's fantastic and has been tremendous in the part, but it never connected for me. It never worked. You know, Davis just said about Mary Poppins. That's how I've described her as well. I've described her as a lusting aunt. You know, I don't. I still don't get it, if I'm honest. For me, the character that we'd seen throughout that season, in particular in Darkwater, pointed towards her being the Rani. You know, there was a lot of things about biochemistry in that, which of course that's tied particularly to the Rani. She never felt like the Master to me, so I never really accepted it until Series 10. I think Michelle Gomez, as I said, I think Michelle Gomez has been incredible in that role. A fantastic ambassador for Doctor Who. She's clearly having the time of her life. And how can you not warm to somebody who's giving their all like that? She has won me over, but the character took a little longer.
Yeah. Now, when we talk about Capaldi's second season, I think for a lot of people, what kept them on board that second season was actually the introduction of Maisie Williams joining the cast of Doctor Who as a semi-regular throughout that season, who turned out to be a pretty big story plot by the time that season was done. And because of all the love of her from Game of Thrones, that kind of kept people on board, because I think a lot of people were kind of debating whether they wanted to stick with Capaldi through that second season. And I think that, and the fact that we saw finally the end of Claire's run as a Time Lord, and now we have Maisie Williams and Claire flying off around in a diner in space. I'm thinking they need to jump over to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy at some point. But Dan, what was the reception with Maisie Williams involved in Capaldi's second season?
Excitement. I think at that time, yeah, the series 9 of Doctor Who, it was rather a muted response. The BBC didn't get behind it as much as they had, and they were screening it in the autumn. And of course, that was the year where they did all those two-parters, experimented with various things with the format, haven't they? But that was the year of where it was all two-parters. And you know, Game of Thrones over here, it's mainstream, but the actors aren't what you'd call household names. And I think if anything, it sort of raised her profile here. And that character, you know, that character's not universally loved either. I thought it was terrific. I really rate that actress, and I can't wait to see her in the New Mutants next year.
Yeah, very excited for
I thought she was a great asset to Doctor Who, and her seeing Ashilda opposite the Doctor, opposite Capaldi's Doctor, if anything, it kind of chiming with what you were saying about Clara earlier, Kyle. Seeing Ashilda with the Doctor made you realise what had been slightly lacking in the relationship between the Doctor and his actual companion. She made a big impact in a short period of time, and you know, I think the fact that we got her when she's one of the main cast members of probably the only series on television that's cult series that's bigger than Doctor Who at the moment is it's really quite something to boast about. I know that she's very proud of being in the show, and it wouldn't at all surprise me if she appeared again at some point.
What about you, Davis? What was your take with Maisie Williams on that ninth season of Doctor Who?
Oh, I loved her in Game of Thrones, and I thought she had an interesting take because she was in the girl who died and the girl who lived, and I thought that was very interesting that, you know, she just can't die, and she just never aged anymore. So I mean, that was actually pretty cool. I did think it was kind of funny at the end when they traveled off in the diner which I thought at first was at the diner that Matt Smith actually went into when they first with the
Went to
astronaut.
America.
Yes, went to America, but I don't believe it was.
It's the same location, Davis. Your eyes aren't playing tricks on you. It's the same location.
Oh, it's the same location. I didn't know.
It is. It was the same diner, actually.
Oh, okay. Because I was wondering if there was any type of connection to that or anything. But the other, companion, which we haven't got a lot of, but I think he has made a humongous impact, has been Nardole.
Yes, Nardole was great. We got some taste of Nardole in that 9th season, and he was a big part of season 10. And let's just jump into season 10, because I think season 10 brought us the greatest improvement to Peter Capaldi, and that's because the amazing Pearl Mackie as Bill was the perfect match for the 12th Doctor and Peter Capaldi. They played off each other so well. It was like going back to Matt Smith and Karen Gillan, or David Tennant and Billy Piper. They worked so well together, and they just fit each other like a glove.
I will agree.
Me too.
What about you, Dan?
I agree entirely. Pearl Mackie and Bill Potts are huge. The exact precise shot in the arm that Doctor Who needed then, again, re-energized the show, seemed to bring out something new in the 12th Doctor, in Capaldi's characterization. It just seemed like the right time for a companion like Bill. The way, there's a lot that's been made of her sexuality and that kind of thing. I'm just talking about the fact that she felt so real. She still feels. I'm talking about her in the past tense. She's still with us for another few weeks at least. But she's such a physical actress. In the same way that Peter Capaldi is very emotive, very relatable. She's not the impossible girl. She's not somebody that's just stepped out of a storybook. She stepped out of a bus shelter over the road from your house. Everybody knows a girl like Bill, and that was and Pearl Mackie seems to know exactly how to pitch it.
Yeah, and what I think is I think she definitely re-energized not only Capaldi, but I think she really re-energized Peter Moffat or Stephen Moffat in this last season, because I felt like the writing greatly improved in this last season, and we had some great episodes. But because I think a lot of people thought that Stephen Moffat was going to be leaving after the Husbands of River Song. So we know now, we're at the point now where we know that coming up with this current Christmas special, we are going to be seeing the end of both Stephen Moffat's run and Peter Capaldi's run. But before we talk about the end of the run and what's coming next, guys, I want to talk about, because it is Christmas time, the great tradition that has been started back when we go all the way back to 2005 with a Doctor Who Christmas special. And it started with the Christmas Invasion, which was the episode that introduced us to David Tennant as the Doctor. And it just started a great tradition of these amazing Doctor Who Christmas Day episodes and shows, and they become their own thing. And Dan, let me start with you. What is your feeling on the Christmas episodes, and what do you think they become as part of the Who lexicon?
Well, I was thinking today, this is the 13th consecutive Doctor Who Christmas special. Not only that, but it's the 13th time that Doctor Who has been the jewel in the crown on Christmas Day television in the UK. I know that that other countries don't make as big a thing as we do about television here in the UK, but it's always been like the biggest TV day of the year. And I've heard Russell T Davies talk about this, but it's true. When I was growing up in the 70s and the 80s, you always wondered why every other program on television had got a Christmas special, but not Doctor Who. And for it to come back, and then within a year, it's got one. And it was on the front of the Christmas Radio Times. It was everywhere. Everybody was talking about it, partly because David Tennant was taking over, obviously, but people wanted Doctor Who on Christmas Day, and now, after 12, 13 years, I think people can't imagine Christmas Day without Doctor Who. There was talk recently that, perhaps that it's something that can't carry on forever, but, if you ever mention taking away Doctor Who on Christmas Day, I think that'll get quite a reaction out of the general public, let alone fandom. It's yeah. I certainly can't imagine it without Doctor Who.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's the way I end my Christmas Day now. It's kind of the last way to end it. I spent time with the family. I'm home. I'm just relaxing.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put on the Doctor Who's Christmas special to kind of wrap up my Christmas. Davis, what about you? What are your feelings about the fact now that I think the Doctor Who Christmas special has become, for a lot of people, a Christmas tradition?
I completely agree. I mean, I always love Christmas episodes in all TV because Christmas is my favorite time of the year. And, seeing a Christmas episode each year, my favorite one, however, is a Doctor Who Christmas Carol, a Christmas
Oh
Carol.
yes, and we're gonna get to that, Davis.
And and the main reason is just because I'm a huge fan of A Christmas Carol story. And it's talk about, how something happens in their life and it sparks hatred, and that there is justification, that there can be some type of redemption to them. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what this Christmas special will be, because we get to see the first Doctor. How cool is
Yes.
that?
So I'm gonna kind of run down here, guys, and let's kind of just hit the Christmas specials as we go along. And before we even do that, we've got to go back to December 25th, 1965, and talk about the Daleks' Master Plan, which was like the first and only Doctor Who special, Doctor Who at the time, to air on Christmas Day. Just some old school Doctor Who, and we would be remiss if we didn't at least bring that up, that we had that episode
Absolutely.
back in the day. So, but for all of us of our current age group, it starts on December 25th, 2005, with the Christmas Invasion, which was the first episode that introduced David Tennant as the 10th Doctor, and it was just it's I think it's the episode that really changed modern day Doctor Who. It really solidified the Christmas episode. It gave us, to many of people's opinion, the best Doctor of the modern age. It was fun, and Tennant just brought such a life to Doctor Who, and it just kind of kicked it off from there. And that's kind of how I see that episode. Davis, how do you feel? Is that kind of how you see that episode as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, how cool how cool is it when he's talking about the human race to this aliens? He's like, from the day they arrived on the planet, and he goes, "Oh wait, that's the Lion King. Never mind, never mind. Where was I?" You knew the tone was already going to be set. It's going to be very lighthearted, but still has some serious nature to it.
That moment that you're talking about, Davis, how we get there just before he does, it's beautiful. I've seen several kids. I've got several kids of my own, and I've watched the episode with them. And as they've got to the age where they can watch Doctor Who, and seeing that look on their face, it's a fantastic piece of television. It brings a smile to your face just thinking about it.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Now, the second Christmas special is got a pretty good character of notice too. It's the first one to introduce Donna, played by the amazing Catherine Tate, who we would, in the episode "The Runaway Bride," and of course we would see Donna later on in a later season join David Tennant as his companion. But I always thought this was one of the more fun episodes of the Christmas episodes of Doctor Who. And Dan, I know Catherine Tate is beloved on your side of the pond, and I know it was a huge deal when she joined Doctor Who for that episode.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I've been thinking about this. If I was to, this may well be my personal favourite of the Tennant specials. And I was never a huge fan of Catherine Tate. She got a huge comedy show over here at the time when she turned around in that wedding gown in the finale of series 2. Hysteria. It was all over the papers. And like I said, that episode, it's breathless. It's very, very visual. The dialogue so snappy. Yeah. And then, of course, you get that. I think that's where the Doctor. You've got that scene at the end where she stops him from. How can I put this? From, is it genocide? I don't know. But you immediately see how that character reflects on the Doctor, what she sees in him. And is that the one where he mentions that he's a Time Lord for the first time?
I believe so.
Yeah, I would say.
so.
You're trying to remember when they drop out the little pieces of the lore throughout the Russell T Davies era. But I think that's possibly my favourite one. It's just so bouncy, and I hear people. There are certain people out there who are very cynical about the Christmas special, guys, and because they're fun, because they can be silly. If you're watching Doctor Who and you don't want silly, you don't want fun, I'm not sure really why you're there in the first place. But that the scene that I always think of is hanging out of the police box, flying down the motorway with the kids staring out the back of the car windows and pointing. As it's again, it can't help. I'm sat here now with a big smile on my face just thinking about it. To me, that's all I need to know. I think that's my favourite of the Tennant ones.
Now for me, the next one, I'm not gonna call it my favorite, but it's definitely in my top 3, and that is Voyage of the Damned. I always thought this was just a fun episode, and the amazing Kylie Minogue guest starring in that episode, kind of being his companion for that episode. And there was a lot of talk that a lot of people were really hoping Kylie Minogue was going to stay on and be the companion for the next season of Doctor Who. And this was just the whole Titanic kind of take on it. Everything. I thought this was just one of the more fun episodes of Doctor Who, and it led off, of course, with the season finale of this ship literally plowing into the Tardis. and then going into this Christmas special. Davis, what were your thoughts on Voyage of the Damned?
I'm trying to remember it. It's been a while since I've actually seen that one.
Me too.
I enjoyed it. I didn't think it wasn't like, oh, I have to watch this all the time. But it was a fun episode. I mean, for sure.
Yeah. Now, Dan, what about you? Because I know a lot of people were very excited with the pairing of Tennant and Kylie Minogue in this special.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask how big a name, how aware you were of Kylie Minogue over there in America, guys, because over here, she's huge, mostly as a singer. We first knew her as an actress, but then she was hugely successful recording artist. And the tabloid newspapers, they love her, obviously, because she's, in case you hadn't noticed, guys, she's quite attractive. But she's a star. She's just got it. She oozes star quality. And opposite David Tennant, like that, at the very, very top of his game. How do you top Catherine Tate? Probably the only way you could go is with Kylie. Excitement was through the roof with that one, and anticipation. And that wasn't the longest of the Christmas specials. It was I think that's the one that feels most like a movie, like it could be a movie.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And then Kylie Minogue is known here. She's not as huge in the States, but she is known. She's had a couple of her songs be big hits over here, so people knew who she was over here. So I think that attracted a lot of the American audience. But the next one is probably one of my least favorite of the Christmas specials, and that is The Next Doctor. And what's the shame about this is because it does have David Morrissey, who I am a huge fan of. But there was just something about this one where you have Tennant meet this man who thinks he's the Doctor because he's been exposed to memories of the Doctor because of something that the Cybermen had been involved with. This one just kind of missed for me, guys. Dan, what was the reaction to The Next Doctor?
My reaction is, yeah, you're right. It's thinner stuff than we'd become used to. As you say, the cast is there. Not just David Morrissey, a fantastic actor. You've got Dervla Kirwan as the villainess of the piece. You've got the Cybermen stomping through the snow. That never gets old either. But once you'd got past that kind of question of wasn't he, if not the very next Doctor, then a future Doctor, then what had you really got? It was perhaps a middling sci-fi romp. And, and of course, by that point, guys, by the time that special was on, we'd already had it announced a couple of months before then that David Tennant would be leaving in the next Christmas special. So there was a little bit of a feeling, ever so slightly, of that it was treading water until you got to the specials that would come a few months and a year later. That could be unfair, because I know that, a lot of time and effort and talent goes into every episode of Doctor Who, and to give us something, there was effort there to give us something audacious. You got the cyber king, the enormous Iron Giant style Cyberman. I bet that made a few kids' Christmases, but my own feeling's kind of the same. It's a little bit forgettable.
Yeah. What about you, Davis?
I liked him seeing that as the Doctor, because I thought, that was a nice little spin on like a steampunk style Doctor, because he had everything, even had an airship as the TARDIS. I mean, it was actually pretty cool to see that, and it was
I'd forgotten
interesting.
that.
Yeah, it was just interesting to see. David Tennant was like, "So, do you remember who I am? How far are you ahead?" I mean, it was like just questioning everything, and come to find out, it was just a gentleman who was imprinted memories of the Doctor, that had been in contact with the Cybermen. So I thought it was an enjoyable episode. I mean, like what Dan said, I mean, it was okay, but I mean, it wasn't a lot to write home about. I mean, even IMDb doesn't have it listed in the Doctor Who series, which I found was very strange.
Yeah. But however, the Christmas and New Year's special of 2009/2010, The End of Time, which was the end of the run for David Tennant, I think to this day is one of the most powerful set of Doctor Who episodes, period. Because I dare anybody who's a Doctor Who fan to say they don't get emotional as David Tennant is doing his farewell tour at the end of time.
Do you think that was actually Russell Davies having some type of input saying, "I don't want to go"?
I think it was a little bit of Tennant and a little bit of
Yeah.
Russell Davies, but I think they both felt like it was time to go. I know Tennant wasn't real excited to be going, but he felt like it was, with Russell leaving, it was time for him to leave. And of course, we get the amazing performance yet again of John Sim as the Doctor, or as the Master. And guys, these go up there as just, I think, some of the more powerful episodes. I don't know if it was the best Doctor Who storyline ever, but it was so just emotionally powerful. And Dan, what were these episodes like for you?
Well, The End of Time, I don't know if we're talking about both parts.
Yeah, but go ahead. Kind of both parts.
I can't separate. Some people can separate these things, I can't. And at The End of Time, obviously, it's one of those things. It's everything but the kitchen sink is in there, And I know that there's a lot of people. I mean, if you guys, I'm thinking in particular of Stephen Shapansky on Radio Free Skaro really doesn't like this story, and I do understand why. It's got a lot of excess in there, but it was a question of how do you top that, and how can you please everybody? I really like it. I haven't seen it for about 4 years, but I really like it. I think the quieter moments that everybody talks about with where Tennant's Doctor's paired with Wilf, played by Bernard Cribbins. Now there's a national treasure. Talk about a much-loved British actor. I think those are worth the price of admission alone. As somebody who is a very visual person, I work in the creative arts, read a lot of comics. and I know Russell T Davies is a big comics fan too. I love ideas like that. The idea that everybody on the planet is suddenly the master. You know, I thought it was an amazing cliffhanger. And for me, the whole story, there's a lot of things in there which don't sit well with me, such as how the master sort of manifests back to life after he's apparently died 18 months before. But it's not the first Doctor Who story to blur those sorts of lines. I think David Tennant went out on top. It's an explosive episode in pretty much every sense. As you say, if you can't watch that and not get emotional, I completely agree. And is it undisciplined? Maybe. Is it excessive? Almost certainly. But that team, what they'd achieved across those 4 series and all those specials, I think they'd earned the right for that kind of indulgence. And the fact is that we lapped it up. I remember speaking to people in between the broadcast of part 1 and part 2. Nobody could wait. That was sort of like a lost week of my life waiting for that story to conclude. And of course you got the gratification that comes with the regeneration.
Yeah. I mean, and that's of course the other big thing about it. That's our first look as Matt Smith as the 11th Doctor. For you, Davis, do you feel that the End of Time was a good wrap up for the Tennant run?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I mean, I thought it was very interesting that I think it was right before then where he had regenerated the hand, or he was actually going to regenerate, and he just regenerated into himself. And they referred back to that much later on, but I thought that was still kind of interesting. I loved how he actually said goodbye to everyone, and I loved because we actually saw then Dr. Donna, happen right there, and I loved Donna as a companion. I thought she was great, and I even have some of the Big Finish where Donna and David Tennant are actually Catherine Tate, because they're in their Big Finish audios, and that was just a lot of fun. So, and that was kind of a deal to see, okay, we're going to a younger person as well. So it was interesting to see the next take with Matt Smith.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into what I think is the best run of Christmas specials, and that is the Matt Smith run of Christmas specials. With maybe only one really not standing out, but to me, my favorite of the Doctor Who Christmas specials, and Davis, you talked a little bit about this earlier, was A Christmas Carol, Matt Smith's first taking the lead in the Christmas specials, doing the take of the classic Dickens story. You have Michael Gambon in there, absolutely amazing. You have Abigail, played by the beautiful Katherine Jenkins. This was just, I go back and watch this one every Christmas because this is just, it's Christmas to me. And then, come on, we have a flying shark. Dan, this one I think really kind of reflected the change to Matt Smith and the energy Matt Smith brought. How did everybody feel about Matt Smith's first Christmas special?
At that point, there's a lot of relief that everything had turned out okay. Again, it was business as usual. I agree. I think A Christmas Carol is fantastic, and it takes a hell of a lot to get me excited about any version of that story. I've seen so many of them. You feel that you could tell your own if you like, but not many of them have got flying sharks in them. They did, but Katherine Jenkins was a big boon to that. Beautiful music, Murray Gold's music. He always delivers extra at Christmas, I feel. But Katherine Jenkins, that whole, the Matt Smith era. What I would say to people is, if the David Tennant and Eccleston era were influenced by comic books, graphic novels, and movies, the Matt Smith era to me is all about children's books and storybooks and fairy tales almost, and A Christmas Carol perfectly draws on that kind of magic, and you got the childlike doctor. They paired him with children quite a lot, Matt Smith, and maybe it did get a little, maybe that got old too, but at this point, it still felt really, really fresh. And well, Michael Gambon.
Exactly. Now, Davis, you had said a little earlier this was your favorite of the Doctor Who Christmas specials, and I completely agree with you. This one just had a certain magic to it, didn't it?
It did. It did. I mean, and just when you start figuring out the story, you're going, "Oh, wait, the Doctor is the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future. How cool is this?" I mean, it was actually pretty cool to actually see everything lined up. And, how weird was it to be on a planet where if you're a debtor's prison or whatnot, that you're locked up in ice for so many years until your family's debt can be paid off or whatnot. So,
Yeah, and of course we know Marilyn is still looking for the 11th Doctor, so.
yes, yes, yes,
I
yes.
forgot about that.
That was pretty funny right there.
Now, the second Matt Smith Christmas special, The Doctor, the Widow, and the Wardrobe, I have to say this is probably my least favorite of the Matt Smith Christmas specials. I enjoyed it, but this one just felt like it was missing a little something. I will say this though, absolutely beautiful all the time in the forest that they were in on this planet. That was just a breathtaking view. But just something about this one didn't connect with me quite as well as A Christmas Carol had. Dan, what were your thoughts?
I'd agree with that. I mean, I don't like. I try and find something different to say, but yeah, it's the Chronicles of Narnia, isn't it? It's the Chronicles of Narnia meets those kind of 1940s sort of post-war Britain movies. It's hard,
Yeah.
It's hard not to respond to that kind of imagery, but I'd have to agree. I'm trying to look for the positive, and I can't. I think visually it's beautiful, but a little too saccharine for my taste personally.
What about you, Davis?
Like what you said, Dan. Visually, it is absolutely beautiful, and it's not one of my favorites. But one of the things I did like about it is at the very end, you hear that the father, the husband, passed away, and the Doctor goes out of his way to correct that. And I mean, or I think he does or something. But anyways, at the very end, it's a happy ending. And you know what? It's Christmas time. You need a happy ending. I think what the 10th
Yeah.
Doctor said, he said, everyone's coming home today, or no one dies today, or anything. So I thought that was very good.
You know what? I don't know about you, Kylie's right.
Oh yeah, he's absolutely
That's
right.
Tardis.
But yeah. But and that leads us to the third of the Matt Smith specials, which is I actually one I very much enjoyed because it brought the return of some introduced some characters as well as really added something I think great to Doctor Who. And of course I'm talking about the Snowman, where we've seen the return of Clara Oswald, or in this case Clara Oswald, and we start really the story of the Impossible Girl. But one of the things that I absolutely love is whenever I have Madame Vastra, Strax, and Jenny Flint on my television screen. I really wish they would have somehow gotten a spin-off with them. You have the Great Intelligence, you have the Doctor in a very dark place after the loss of Amy and Rory Pond. But what I loved about this, and it's something that I loved about Jenna Coleman as her companion with Matt Smith, was they had a great snappy banter where you really felt Jenna Coleman was an equal to Matt Smith as far as her companion stuff about being able to fire right back at Matt Smith at that same energy level. Something that, as much as I love Karen Gillan, she didn't really have that energy to match Matt Smith, and Jenna Coleman as Clara Oswald did. And so I really enjoyed this special. Davis, this was a big one because it really did add completely Clara to the lexicon of Doctor Who. What were your thoughts on what this special brought in its own unique way to Doctor Who?
Well, it brought Claire, it brought the Impossible Girl, and you are absolutely correct that the chemistry between the two would be similar to how Pearl Mackie is with Capaldi. I mean, that's just when you have that final chemistry between the two companions, you know it's going to work really, really well. I mean, like how Tennant was with Rose and oh, with even Catherine Tate as well. But you know, it was a good story. I mean, I enjoyed it, and it actually set up for what was to come, which was a huge upbringing with how everything came about.
Yeah. Now, Dan, I know one of the other big things from this episode, of course, and I brought it earlier, was the introduction of Madame Vastra, Jenny Flint, and Strax into the Doctor Who universe. And I love these characters. I wish we could get more with these characters. What was the reception to these characters, as well as now adding Clara into the mix full time?
Uh, well, I think we'd seen them before. I think we'd seen them before at the halfway of Series 6. I'm sure they'd been in it before. Um, Actually, I'm going to have to change my vote. Did I say Christmas Carol was my favourite Matt Smith special? I think it. Can I change my vote? I think it is. It's this one. I absolutely adore the snowman, top to toe. Uh, yeah, I'm not sure. So much so, I'm not. I'm not even sure where to start. Big fan of the Paternoster gang. All three of them. I know Strax tends to get all the attention. You know what? I love them all. I I've always been a little sure about whether a spin-off really had legs, but when they're with Matt Smith's Doctor, they're sort of like backing him up. They're kind of like the A-Team, and there's something about, and the fact that they are there looking after him. You know, because at that point, when we see the Doctor again in that, what really chimes with me on a personal level, without going too deeply, is the fact that he's still grieving. I find that incredibly effective after losing Amy and Rory in the Angels Take Manhattan when we'd last seen him. And River's gone. We're never told where or when or why. And then we're presented, as you said, with this energetic young woman who's leading a double life. So it taps into Victoriana, which normally I find so boring. Something about the snowman that really brought it to life for me. And of course, being an old school Doctor Who fan, the Great Intelligence, when when I realised who they were up against, and that it sort of effectively acts as a kind of prequel to the Abominable Snowman. And you've got Richard E. Grant and the voice of Sir Ian McKellen. There's, you know, big double dose of gravitas there. You don't even have to see Ian McKellen. And he still brings so much to the episode. And the even, and they don't take the easy option either. You know, the arc that the Doctor travels in that, everything's suddenly not all right by the end of it. But of course, there is, you know, it does end with the tragedy, which does at least bring him out of his, what would you call it? Out of his solitude, and gives him a new purpose. Yeah, out of the soul. It gives him a purpose. And springs it off into series 7. You know, it did that. A lot of these episodes feel like a fresh start, and I'm not sure that any of the Christmas specials have done that quite so well as that one.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And that brings us to the time of the Doctor, which, as emotional as End of Time is, this was probably the one that got me. It's the last Matt Smith appearance as Doctor Who, as a regular. And it's a great story. We see him. We know he's on his last regeneration. We're going through everything. We see Matt Smith portray the old elderly Doctor, absolutely outstanding. But for me, guys, I mean, the cherry on top of this was the emotional scene after he's been granted another regeneration cycle from the Time Lords, and they're in the TARDIS, and he can feel his regeneration coming on, and to have Karen Gillan appear, even if as Amy Pond, I mean, guys, I got to admit it, I teared up a little bit. I mean, it was just so of an amazing performance, and really, I wish we would have gotten more time with Matt Smith as the 11th Doctor, and then all of a sudden, bam, we're right there with Peter Capaldi as the 12th Doctor. But as a swan song for Matt Smith, this was so beautifully well done. Of course, we were just coming off the 50th anniversary special where you had Matt Smith and Tennant team up. That was amazing. Dan, this was a pretty special time in Doctor Who, and this kind of wrapped up that anniversary run, as I guess the best way to put it. How was everything received as far as the end of Matt Smith's run, with for you and for your fellow fandom over there on the other side of the pond?
After the anniversary, after the Day of the Doctor, it was very much a case of how do you follow that? And the fact that I think it was very, very wise that Stephen Moffat didn't go crazy big. He didn't try and top it. He actually scaled it right the way back down. I mean, it's ironic. I was just talking about the Snowman when that was all about putting a spring back in the Doctor's step and sending him off technically on a new mission, if you like. At this point with it, he's taking it right back down, and he makes choices in that episode, and his life gets kind of smaller and smaller and smaller. And of course, we find out that he's the final incarnation of that original regeneration cycle. And in a sense, this is the character doing something that we've never seen him do before, and sort of prepare for the end of his own life. And to give to that community, to make a choice to stay with them, to be an active part of their community, and to live among them. And that's, at that point, he doesn't think he necessarily has a future. And it's such, and Matt Smith taps into that beautifully. I mean, the makeup is extraordinary. So all the production values of this one, again, just beautiful. And it carries you through to that. I mean, you've got the two regenerations. They do have their cake and eat it there. We've got the big explosive regeneration, and then we've got the reset. Time of the Doctor for me, it was solid a little by some of the earlier elements. There's a scene where the Doctor is naked at Clara's house for Christmas dinner and things like that. And the whole gag where he pulls off the wig, that's in that episode as well, isn't it? Which I felt was there kind of perhaps to amuse Matt Smith and Stephen Moffat more than the audience. And that for me, that always breaks the spell a little bit when you're aware that's going on. But the good in that episode, the elements that do move you, it's unforgettable, and that is to that snap regeneration at the end where he's just gone in the blink of an eye. No long drawn out speech. That was a statement of intent. That was just like the shot of Capaldi's eyebrows had been in the 50th. It was okay. He's here. This is okay. The boss is here now. This is where things are really going to change. It's one of those episodes. I mean, this goes without saying because it's a regeneration episode. But again, if you're of a certain age watching that, and I can see you got moved just thinking about it, Kyle, and none of us are children anymore. But I always think of the children that have watched these, and there's something about Matt Smith's Doctor in particular and I think it's that childlike, almost Peter Pan quality that he had, that children will have felt the passing of that Doctor even more than David Tennant's.
Yeah. Davis, what about you? Because I know one of the things that was very interesting about this episode was you have the 11th Doctor on this planet that he's choosing to defend, and literally every villain that ever came within the Matt Smith run shows up to try and take him out
Yeah, they
on
do.
this planet.
I mean, from the Cybermen to the Angels to the wow, there's
The Silence.
the Silence, everyone comes in there. But you know, you said about the quick regeneration that he has straight to Capaldi, and when he's actually given the regeneration to reset the cycle or whatnot, he does have that somewhat of a regeneration that's a little bit longer when he's talking to every single enemy that he has, and you know he takes them out with his regeneration and everything, and he kind of resets him to where he looks younger, and then that's when he actually starts the uh, piece to go back to the TARDIS. But you know, I thought it was really well done. I thought it was really good, and still surprised to see Amy Pond there, even though that was the first person he saw when he started the regeneration. I still would have thought it would have been River,
I'm glad you said that,
Yeah,
because that surprised me too.
because
well,
technically Amy is his mother-in-law.
yeah, but I think Amy has such an important love for him, and we're gonna get into River here coming up shortly. But one of the things to remember too is Karen Gillan was very much in the red-headed wig because she had just shaved her head to play
Wigs all
Nebula for
round.
Guardians of the Galaxy.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right.
But that leads us into the Capaldi run of Christmas specials, and guys, without a doubt, these are the craziest Christmas specials of the Doctor Who Christmas
Yeah.
special run, because they are all just completely out there and insane. And you know, it starts with Last Christmas, where you feel like you've got Nick Frost playing Santa Claus, you've got Dream invading aliens, you get it's bizarre. It's fun, but it's bizarre. Davis, I gotta have your take on this.
It was fun. I mean, it was fun, bizarre, and you're going, well, I guess this is fitting to be this incarnation of the Doctor, and it has this such a weird thing. The what was it? The return of the Mysterio, or
Yeah, that was the most recent one before that was last year's Christmas special.
the return of Doctor Mysterio. How crazy is that? I mean, that was probably one of the. It was a fun episode, I know for sure, and then the last one we actually get to see is the next to last one was The Husband's a River Song. And I have to say that was probably by far my favorite.
Yeah, no, Dan, it's easy to bunch these Capaldi runs together because I think Last Christmas and the Return of Doctor Mysterio just fall in that completely insane. They just said, "Forget it. We're just gonna go have fun. We don't care what's going on with these."
You really didn't know what they were going to do next with these. I mean, I really like Last Christmas. I think that's probably my favourite of the three, and which is partly because I think Nick Frost is great in it, and I mean, originally that was originally going to be Clara's last episode, I believe.
Yeah, that was the plan.
Yeah, and for me, and I think it works really, really well like that. It brings that character to a natural conclusion, I think, and it's got. I mean, this is Doctor Who. If you know, they use the word homage where other people would say rip off. There's a lot of they take a lot of inspiration from Inception with that, and flip and subvert that, subversion. And yeah, I really like it. I think Capaldi's fantastic in it and really focused. And what I like most about that special is that it feels the most tailored to his Doctor, I think. And yeah, I think we had taken a while getting there between the Doctor and Clara, but by then you could see why they'd been through quite a lot together. With Danny's death and the way that he treated Danny, and of course she'd stopped travelling with him for a while, and I just thought it wrapped it all up so beautifully, and how they bent what was reality and what was a dream, and yeah, it worked for me. It really did work for me, and people don't talk about that one anywhere near as much. It's not as
Yeah.
showy.
Yeah. Now, I think for the three for me, the most powerful one, I agree with you, Davis, was the Husbands of River Song. Seeing Alex Kingston return as River Song was absolutely great, and having that last thing where it's the Doctor and River have their final date together, which lasts 24 years, the span of a night on that planet. And I always been an Alex Kingston fan. I've loved her back from her days on ER, but I think River Song might be one of the most fun characters outside of Captain Jack Harkness that has ever graced the screen with the
I
Doctor.
love that woman. She was
Indeed.
great with Matt Smith, and of course they had all that time together. But somehow, with Capaldi's Doctor, it just seems so right. It seems that they seem to fit together so well, and you can imagine them spending those 24 years together, having genuinely, I mean, people don't talk about the Doctor like this with any great ease, but being in love, uh, being with the person that each of them is supposed to be with, and know that they will have had the time of both their lives in that 24 years. I mean, that episode's my least favourite, but that's not to say that I don't like it.
Mm. Now, Davis, for you, because you talked about this is being your favorite episode. I mean, just it was so great to see Alex Kingston get the spotlight in this episode.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. I mean, and it kind of started piecing everything together because this was going to be her last time. And correct me if I'm wrong, but after this was over, that's when she heads to the library, correct?
yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, I thought it was just fitting all the storylines together very nicely in a nice bow. And like you said, I mean, like I said, if Doctor Who would have ended the series like right there, or Stephen Moffat said, "Well, this is my last one. I'm ending." It was a great note to go out on.
I agree. Doesn't the Doctor gift her the Sonic that she uses in the library at the end of? It's
Correct.
beautiful,
That
Yes.
is correct.
beautiful moment.
Yes. I thought that was actually really, really cool.
Yeah. Now, I gotta hit just real briefly on the return of Doctor Mysterio, basically pulling comic book nature out. I was not a big fan of this one. It just kind of was like felt like okay, we got to do something for Christmas. We're not really sure what we're gonna do. We're gonna do this. It left out an opening for some things, but it kind of never got followed up on after in the next following season because they really did change directions with bringing in Paul Mackey as Bill, and we got this amazing season, which leads into what we have upcoming, gentlemen, and that is Twice Upon a Time, which is going to be Stephen Moffat and Peter Capaldi's last episodes as Doctor Who before we start a huge new era for Doctor Who. But before we talk about what's coming, let's take a quick look at what we've got right in front of us with this Christmas special, because it's going to be something special, because we will have the return of the first Doctor in this special. And Dan, I'm very curious as to what the anticipation for this episode is for you.
For me personally, I love the first Doctor. I love David Bradley. Whether I love David Bradley playing the first Doctor, I'm not entirely sure yet. I loved him as William Hartnell. Thought I was watching that docudrama again a few weeks ago. I'm a lot more comfortable with him playing the Doctor than I was when they revealed it at the end of the last series. Now, having seen the promotional photographs, I can't wait. But this is such a beloved character, obviously, and originated by the late great William Hartnell, played by Richard Herndl in 1983 for that one occasion. So it's not like it's not been done before. But for David Bradley, I've got every faith now, after several months of being a bit 50-50 on it, that he will not impersonate, but capture the spirit, embody that role. And of course, it's still Peter Capaldi's series. It's still the 12th Doctor's tenure. And what I'm curious about is why now? Why any Doctor? Why a multi-Doctor story, but why that Doctor? What, him being a supporting character in this, what is he there to reflect in the 12th Doctor on his final night? That's what and I haven't, here I am talking about Doctor Who with you gentlemen. I'm going no spoilers on this. I've seen a few photographs. I've not watched any of the trailers. I didn't watch the Children in Need preview clip. I want to savor all 60 of those minutes brand new. I'm sure I'll be won over by it. I usually am.
Davis?
Well, I don't want to spoil anything from what I know, but I do know this. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dan. We never saw a regeneration of the first Doctor, did we?
Well, well, we did. We did.
We did.
Yeah, we do see it. But what we didn't see was how the Doctor got from that base at the Arctic back to the TARDIS. We see a few footsteps in the snow, but this is where they've slotted this new special in that gap. We didn't see the regeneration yet. Mm-hmm. Go on, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just thinking that because you see at the very end where Capaldi is like, no, I can't, he's refusing to regenerate. And I'm wondering if he's having to go back to the original to talk to them about whatever the story might line up.
Yeah, I'd say that there's something in that moment that they're both at a very particular place in their lives. And that what we do here of what the first Doctor is muttering to himself as he makes his way back to the TARDIS about it being ridiculous, the idea of changing, of regenerating. And obviously by this point, the 12th Doctor is an old hand at it. You think he'd be used to it by now, but he's got his own reasons for not wanting to regenerate. It's certainly promising. Of something that we've not seen before, not heard before.
Yeah. No, and I think this is going to be one of the more intense Christmas specials that we've had in a while. And the fact that we're dealing with probably realistically seeing two different regenerations, as we will probably somehow in some way see at least the start of the regeneration for the first Doctor into the second Doctor. And we will see the regeneration of Peter Capaldi into the 13th Doctor. Which leads us into, gentlemen, what has been the biggest deal in Doctor Who probably since the modern relaunch of Doctor Who. And that is, for the first time ever, we are going to have a female Doctor played by the amazing Jodie Whittaker. A lot of you will know her from Broadchurch or perhaps Attack the Block, which she starred with John Boyega of Star Wars fame in. And gentlemen, we were all waiting on pins and needles. A lot of us thought this was going to be what was going to be done with the Doctor. A lot of people had really speculated it was going to be a female Doctor. There were a couple of other names thrown around as well. Well, both male and female. I know Haley Atwell's name had been thrown around. And we can't forget, too, we are getting, for the first time in a good while, an episode of Doctor Who that hasn't been run either by Russell T Davies or Stephen Moffat, as we are looking at the start of the new writing team led up by Chris Chibnall from well-known Broadchurch, and he also worked on Torchwood. Guys, this is going to be a whole new direction for Doctor Who. It looks to be like she is going to have multiple companions. But guys, I've got to start off with first the major announcement and the shaking of fandom that it has caused with Jodie Whittaker being announced as the 13th Doctor. Davis, I want to start with you on this. What was your initial reaction? Because I know here in the States, a lot of people are very, very excited about this.
My first reaction when I saw it, I was like, oh, it's a female Doctor. Okay. I think I can make a custom figure of her. And that afternoon, after I saw the trailer for it and everything, I was able to make a custom figure of her, and I posted in one of my toy group Facebook pages, and I got a lot of applaud from it. So I thought it was actually really cool. So, I don't care if it's a male or female or anything of that sort. I just really want to see some really great stories. And that's
Yeah.
that's that's the really cool thing about it is, it's not whether, whoever the doctor may be, as long as they have a great story and good characterization and everything, I think it will actually do really well. So that's what I want to see.
Yeah. I know at least here in the States, a lot of people are very excited. There've been a few detractors. It's just the way it is, especially in the world we live in now with social media where everybody has their platform to stand on. But Dan, I want to go to you because I am very curious to see how this change has really affected the home of Doctor Who, shall we say it? What is going on there as far as the reaction to Jodie Whittaker being the Doctor?
Considering cons, considering that she's not actually appeared yet, she's probably been over the last 5-6 months one of the most seen faces in the British media. But we've only got two images. The original image of her in the forest with the hoodie, and then just a few weeks ago in costume. And those have travelled so far and so wide. She wasn't someone who was a name that people recognised. She was, I recognise she's the woman who from this and from that and from the other. Which for me, if you're casting the Doctor, looking back through the legacy of the show, that's how it tends to work the best. Um, there's a huge amount of curiosity, of excitement, of how can I put this? People who don't watch Doctor Who are interested in this, and we're talking about the casting. It's made headlines in every conceivable sense. For me, the most important thing is Jodie Whittaker. I'm a huge fan of Broadchurch. She was, for me, the best thing about that. The writing was fantastic anyway, but I thought her performance, particularly series 1 and 2 of Broadchurch, was the beating heart of that show. She moved me to tears several times as the grieving mother, and one of the reasons why I didn't like series 3 quite so much because she was hardly in it. Then I think you mentioned Kyle Attack the Block. Fantastic film. It's hard to sort of detect where her Doctor may be. I went back and watched Attack the Block again a couple of months ago, looking for some more, because this is what happens. I did the same with Peter Capaldi's Doctor, thinking, what could her Doctor possibly be like? And I think you do see a sense of it in that, if either of you watched the film lately. But, she's a very, very versatile actress, very, very strong, arguably she's hit that crest of the wave now. Her name is made already before she's even appeared on screen. I personally, I think if you're going to cast a woman as the Doctor, you couldn't really have found a better candidate than her at this particular time. Like I say, there was a lot of big names mentioned, a lot of speculation. You mentioned Hayley Atwell. That was never going to happen for a number of reasons. I mean, she's at the moment, she's in a period drama at the moment on the BBC, but that was never going to happen. And several other, Helen Mirren was another name,
Oh yeah,
and the actress from Doctor Strange, who played the villain in Doctor Strange.
oh yeah,
Tilda Swinton. That was the one that everybody was mentioning the most. That's high in the sky. In Jodie Whittaker, they've got somebody who is arguably as talented, but who hasn't got that kind of profile. And Doctor Who will make her a star. I've no doubt about that whatsoever. And yeah, it's going to be a long wait. It's going to be a long wait for those first few episodes. Not having said that, we're used to long waits. We're Doctor Who fans.
This is true. Now, I think for me, I'm very excited. Again, I'm a big fan of Jodie Whittaker's. I think I'm excited not only for Jodie Whittaker, but for some new blood into Doctor Who to get some new interpretation of Doctor Who with the new writing team and see where they're going to take Doctor Who. And I know here in the States, I know a lot of people who are very interested and are going to be tuning into Doctor Who maybe for the first time because of this change. And it makes me very excited, and I truly do hope that people embrace this and welcome Jodie in as the Doctor and give it a chance to build and develop, because I think this is very much like when we go back to Christopher Eccleston taking over as a Doctor. You're gonna have to give this a little bit of time.
Yeah,
But
I agree with that. I think it's the biggest. It's the equivalent, even though there's only a few months, not years and years in between. This is the biggest relaunch that we've had since 2005, without a shadow of a doubt, and not just in the most obvious areas of what we can see, but it's not gonna sound the same. Murray Gold's not going to be providing the music anymore, and the dialogue isn't going to be what we've become used to from Stephen Moffat. It's not going to sound the same. It's not going to look the same. They're using all these new lenses, these anamorphic, more filmic lenses, and the story is rumored to be delivered in a very, very different way. So it's changing almost from top to toe.
yeah, no, and I think this is it's in a very exciting and very interesting time. But with that, I think we've kept everybody long enough. I think it's time to get it back into the Tardis and see where we can land again for further adventures of Doctor Who. But before we do that, I want to thank both Davis Grayson and Dan Hadley for joining us. And Dan, where can people find you on social media? Where can they find your work on social media?
Well, as you mentioned earlier on, I run a Facebook group called the Space Book, and that's a whole sort of hub of little groups all connected, but the main two are the Space Book and Doctor Who and Company. It speaks for itself. We were talking about Doctor Who so much in the Space Book, and believe it or not, there are some geeks there who don't like Doctor Who. We're working on them, but we're talking about Doctor Who so much that we started Doctor Who and Company as well. That's even bigger. So you can find us there in the search field for the Space Book or Doctor Who and Company. There's a couple of questions to answer. There's playful questions before we agree a membership, but we'll let you write in. And as for me personally and my work, I'm at Dan Hadley Fine Tunes. I'm a graphic designer and cartoonist, storyboard artist, and pretty much anything that they'll let me get away with.
Well, thank you, Dan, so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure to have you here to talk the Doctor. And of course, Davis, we can find you all over the Fandom Podcast Network, whether it's a little Couch Potato Theater or an appearance on Culture Clash. But where can people find you on social media so they can reach out to you and talk to you, not only about all the great things you do here on Fandom Podcast Network, but about all the amazing custom toy work you do? Because for those of you who haven't seen it, Davis is an artist personified when it comes
I've got to see this.
Why, thank you so much. I appreciate it. You can find me on Instagram. I post action figure photos of some of my work that I do and just other photos I take of different action figures. You could find me at Instagram at Springer_2017.
And of course, My name is Kyle. You can find me on Twitter at AKyleW, and on Instagram at AKyleFandom. And this is the Fandom Podcast Network. And of course, you can find us on Stitcher, iTunes, Google Play, and of course at our home base, which is Podbean. And you can find us on our Podbean website and our homepage at fpnet.podbean.com. You can email us at fandom, or you can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. And you can find us on Twitter at fanpodnetwork. And I'm real quickly, I want to talk about all the other great shows you can find on the Fandom Podcast Network. Of course, we start with Culture Clash, which is our flagship show and gives you all the latest in news, movie reviews, and whatever else is just going on in pop culture. And I can promise you this, over the next couple of weeks, there's going to be a lot of Star Wars being talked about, because Davis, we're only less than a week away now from The Last Jedi.
What?
Wait, there's a Star Wars movie coming out? What?
Yeah, I know. I know, right? But, and of course, I have Davis here, which means we've got to talk about Couch Potato Theater. And Davis, one of the things that's coming out for Couch Potato Theater, will be out probably before you hear this recording, but the first part of it will be out. Because a few months ago, you joined up with our good friend Christian from Mark Who 42, and you did a little Couch Potato Theater about the Eighth Doctor.
Yes, we did. And it was a lot of fun. We actually did a retrospect of the movie. And we also included the Night of the Doctor, too, since that was the two appearances of the Eighth Doctor that we saw on screen. And we did a film commentary of the Eighth Doctor, which was a lot of fun. And it was the first time Christian actually participated in that on a podcast. So he can actually be reached at Mark Who 42, and it's based here in Central Florida. So, and it is one of the top Doctor Who podcasts. So if you have not started listening to that yet, I would definitely.
I'm going to write that down.
Click and subscribe. Mark Who 42.
42. And of course, too, we've got Blood of Kings, which is our Highlander show, and a lot of great stuff coming there. They just wrapped up their final show from the Highlander television 25th anniversary. And of course, Kevin and Norman just bring all the knowledge of Highlander. And they've got, in their upcoming most recent episode, they're going to be spotlighting the Kurgan with, of course, Fandom Podcast contributor Aaron Gill. And trust me, nobody knows more about the Kurgan than Aaron. So you are going to be quite informed there. And of course, we've got our newest show, Davis, which is Discoville, covering all things, not only Star Trek Discovery, but the Orville, which just had its huge season finale this past week. And our next episode is going to dive deep into that Orville season finale. And, Norman is a wealth of Star Trek knowledge. And so any conversation with Discovery or the Orville is just a blast, and it's been a hit for us on the Fandom Podcast Network, and I want to thank everybody for tuning into that and listening. And of course, we also have finally Good Evening, a Alfred Hitchcock podcast, which is done by Brandon, Chris, and Tom, and it's like going to a college course on suspense and anything to do with Alfred Hitchcock. I promise you, when you get done listening to all the episodes, you can apply for a college credit. I'm pretty certain of that. And of course, finally, for us here in the States, it's football season. And that means The End Zone, which is covering everything with American football. And of course, Kevin and my own mediocre fantasy football advice. Again, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for being part of this. Doctor Who is something special that has been one of the longest running fandoms in the world. And it's so great to be able to share this with you, especially as we come up to the Christmas special. And I just want to thank you both for being here and wish you both a happy holidays.
Oh, thank you. I want to say thank you for having me in particular.
And you're welcome, and you are welcome back anytime, Dan. This has been a lot of fun.
I'm going to go now because I'm going to go right to IMDb and make sure I'm going to put in that entry for the next Doctor that Davis was talking about. That's somebody's got to sort that out. So that's my next stop.
Yes, go for it.
I'm on.
And Davis, of course, we will be catching you on Couch Potato Theater and a few other things coming out here shortly. So to all of our listeners out there, may the Tardis appear in your backyard and be able to take you away to whatever time in the space in the universe you want to go to. And hopefully somebody will be coming out telling you, I am the Doctor. Hey, Kevin, I hear you're one of the Fandom Podcast Network's co-founders.
I heard the same rumor about you too, Kyle. Like the Three Musketeers, we would be incomplete without our third member and co-founder, Norman.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's an honor to be part of the Fandom Podcast Network with you two. Kyle, why don't you start us off and let everyone know what great shows we have on the network?
Absolutely. Starting with our flagship show on the network, we have Culture Clash, your weekly fandom news show covering everything news, reviews, and whatever crazy things we can come up with. Of course, we also have Good Evening, an Alfred Hitchcock podcast with Tom Caldwell, Brandon Shea-Mutula, and Chris High. Kevin, what else do we have on the network?
Kyle, we also have Time Warp, a look back on our classic and nostalgic fandoms that we still celebrate today. Also, if you're a hard rock music fan, I host the Hair Metal podcast as we rediscover the nostalgia of the 1980s hair metal bands. Norman, we're not done yet. What else have we got on the Fandom Podcast Network?
Well, Kevin, you and I co-host Blood of Kings, a Highlander podcast covering all things Highlander. And I also co-host with you, Kevin, and Kyle, and other special guests, Discoville, a Star Trek Discovery, and the Orville podcast. But Kyle, last and certainly not least, what are the other shows on the network?
Well, for all you movie fans out there, this podcast is for you. We have Couch Potato Theater, covering cult classic and fan favorite movies we don't get off the couch for. And for you football fans, we have this show for you, The End Zone, giving you all the great mediocre fantasy football advice you can get and covering everything the NFL. And finally, you Doctor Who fans out there, we have Type 40, a Doctor Who fandom podcast. Now, Kevin, can you tell everyone how to find all these great programs on the Fandom Podcast Network?
Sure, Kyle. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network master feed at the fpnet.podbean.com. The Fandom Podcast Network is on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, and Google Play. You can also find us on Facebook under Fandom Podcast Network. If you'd like to email us, you can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. We are also on Instagram under Fandom Podcast Network and on Twitter at FanPodNetwork.
Also, please search Fandom Podcast Network on tpublic.com for our store, where you can find all our shows and their logos and great t-shirts and other fun items. Also, please search Fandom Podcast Network on iTunes and leave us a review.
Thank you so much for listening and supporting the Fandom Podcast Network. And remember, respect others and most importantly, enjoy your fandom.